But we talk about games and comics and movies and music and just all things geek, and that's kind of why we call ourselves the Omni Geeks, because we talk about a little bit of everything. And that's going to be the discussion that we'll have today. To a point, we all grew up watching comic books, reading comic books, watching these movies, playing video games, and that's kind of where the discussion is going to go today, is the legitimacy of these things as entertainment for grown people. Not adult entertainment, mind you, but entertainment for adults. Hi. Is that better? Can we see it moving? I hate this thing. I'm okay. Go ahead.
I would say welcome to what eventually will be the Omni Geek Cast, this episode of the Omni Geek Cast. Like John said, we're going to be talking about some things that have to do with some statistics you find about video gaming that show beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's not kids' toys. Many view it that way. But just to start, like when I was in high school, my grandmother stayed on my case constantly about being too old to play games. So my entire teenage years, I constantly got quoted 1 Corinthians 13:11. When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And my grandmother would constantly quote that to me, referring to video games. And so she's basically saying, look, you should be past these childish things. And that was kind of the household that I grew up in. Now, if you know much about the Bible, you know that verse is not talking about video games. And so that's completely out of context. But that is the norm in a lot of places. A lot of people view gaming as something that's a child's toy, something that kids do. And part of that is the way the gaming began in the late 70s and early 80s, but we still heard while we were in high school, way back in the 1990s, that
last century.
Right, way back in the last century we were in high school. We still heard about the fact that those were kids' toys, and we were expected, let me get that word out, to grow past that. And the truth is, like, while we were in high school, gaming began to grow along with us. It was really the same age we were if you think about what it was geared towards. So when we were in middle school and high school, gaming began to be more geared towards teenagers. So you had things like the Sega Genesis, and then, of course, the PlayStation in the mid-90s. They were marketed towards an older group, so they weren't seen as kids' toys. But the misconception today is that video games are toys, and if you have grown up to be our age, which is nearing 40, that you are being childish if you play video games, if you haven't moved past that in your life. And there's so many people that just have a misconception about that. They don't even realize how far video gaming has come to the point where it is now, where you have some very intricate storylines, you have much better graphics. There's so much artistry that goes into it. The musical scores and the writing is better. And video games literally are a legitimate form of entertainment for adults when you begin to realize some things about it. And we've gotten just a few statistics here, and John's looking at them too. But most people still view video games as, well, this is something my kid would play or my child would play. The problem with that is most gamers are adults, and some of them pretty old adults, like they're nearing senior citizen bracket, not you, and still playing games. And that's because they started years ago when gaming started. And not only games, but comic books are kind of seen in that same light. I'll let John speak a little bit about comics and specifically.
Yeah, a lot of us grew up with these characters, and I think that's kind of something that we mentioned on our podcast a couple of months ago, is that along with gaming and comic books and some of the movies that we watch and television shows, it's not just playing games or some mind-numbing event. It's actually, for me, it was more a study of character and study of characters. And I grew up, and I've told Nathan this before, probably the thing that jumped out to me when I was a child, I grew up watching Transformers and He-Man. That was my jam back in the day. And I remember seeing a comic book in a convenience store with Superman holding up a sword, and it looked like He-Man's sword. And so when I was 5 years old, it was amazing. And I don't remember what exactly it was, but from that point on, I was a Superman fan. And it's not just it's the guy that wears the blue suit and with the red underwear on the outside, which went away for a while and it's coming back, but that's another story. But it's something about Superman that it appeals to humanity. There's the thing about Superman. It's a lot of people say that his weakness is kryptonite. It's not really that. It's his attachment to the people around him that makes him the most vulnerable, and that makes him more human than even you would say Batman, because Batman stays away from those attachments. And so for me, and that's looking at it as an adult. As a child, okay, I saw Superman with a sword and it was cool. And so then I kind of read and I was a fan of the character, but now when you start to look at things and you go at it with the mindset of, okay, this is a character, and let's study that character a little bit. I turned the love of comic books as a child into an English degree as an adult, because I could sit and read comic books for hours. And Chris he's known me quite a while. That's Chris right there, the ugly guy in the Star Wars shirt. But he's really ugly, man. I can't help it. I'm kidding. It's
just berate the fans, why don't you?
It's just that one.
He's front row for
just
you.
Just that one. And Colton's already been to the principal's office twice today, so come on. He's not even in school. But anyway, the thing is that we look at it as adults, and how many of you have actually read the Kingdom Come series? Have you read it at all? Take a look at it. It's a DC, it's an Elseworlds thing, and it's Superman as he's older, and half of the superheroes in this comic book die in a nuclear explosion, mind you, and it's a war between superheroes. That is not a child's novel. So it's a lot of these things need to be censored.
You mentioned that.
Yeah, go ahead.
He mentioned that it's not a child's novel, not a child's book. That's the common mistake that a lot of people make when it comes to gaming today, is that as long as you view it like it's a child's toy, you won't put things in the proper perspective as far as what your child needs to be playing. You say, oh, it's a toy, any of them are fine. Not all of them are fine. Many of them are geared towards adults. I failed to mention this earlier, but 72% of all gamers are over the age of 18. So that's all adults. And a great percentage, nearly half, are 36 or older. So that's why I say most gamers are growing older. They have grown old with gaming itself. So you have literally 30% or so of all of those polled are 18 or under. So most gamers are adults and well into adulthood. But what he's talking about that book, and if you've seen that book, you know that's not a children's story. The art in there, the storyline is not for kids. And that's one of the big mistakes that some parents make when it comes to video games. They just assume, well, all video games are toys for kids, and then they're buying Grand Theft Auto for their 10-year-old, you know. And then they get upset when they ease into the room one night and their their kid is shooting people in the streets, and and they think, well, what are you playing? Well, you let him play it because you assumed that all games were for kids, right? So if we treat them like they should be treated, then that kind of curbs a lot of that. And we mentioned the fact that gaming has grown up with us, and it has to be said, it has to be understood that playing games is not a thing that's immature or somehow a childish hobby. Let's think about some of the hobbies that people have that are completely socially acceptable as adults. They're the same thing, they're just wasting time, right? You think about something like games on smartphones. You can play Candy Crush for 5 hours a night and nobody bats an eye, but fire up a PlayStation and suddenly you're childish, right? Or how many of you play fantasy football, right? What is fantasy football? It's Dungeons and Dragons for jocks, okay?
Jock wannabes.
People that couldn't hack it as jocks are now playing fantasy football. It's Dungeons and Dragons. It's a fantasy game, and they're tied to actual events going on, but all of their buying and selling and trading players and putting their team together, it's fantasy. It's not real, right? And somehow that's perfectly acceptable for adults of any age to be involved in. I know grown men who will have sleepovers at somebody's house to pick their fantasy football team, right? And somehow that's acceptable, but video gaming is not, right? I don't understand why that's the case. Well, most everybody can relate to spending hours a night in front of a television set. That's fine. Nobody bats an eye at that. Nobody cares about that. But turn off the TV and go into the game room, or like I said, turn on your PlayStation or Xbox, and suddenly you're childish, right? Or your wife or your husband, either one, is saying, you don't need to play that all night, right? And we tell the kids, you only get this amount of time per night. You can play for 1 hour a night on this gaming system. Meanwhile, mom and daddy is sitting in front of the TV until midnight, right? So
what's your lifetime?
Right, and that's every night, right? So some things society deems as completely acceptable, and then when it comes to comic books and games, and whether we're playing some tabletop games out here at the convention today, all of those things somehow are childish. It's just your chosen hobby, and that's what it happens to be. And it's just the same as all the other hobbies. They're all time wasters. I don't think anyone has the right to say, well, your hobby is not legitimate, but I can have a sleepover at my 40-year-old friend's house and pick a fantasy football team, right? But like John was saying, I'll give him the mic back here in just a second, but like he was saying, there are things in comics and games too that can lead to other interests. He said comic books led him to seek out an English degree. There are plenty of people that play video games that move into that field. Maybe they want to develop video games or be a game tester. Maybe they want to be on YouTube reviewing games and doing it from that angle. If you're like us, you have 10 people that watch that video, and some people have millions of people that watch their videos.
Two people.
No, we've broken double digits every now and then.
Yeah, every once in a while.
But the point of it is, today what we're trying to say is, don't let anyone make you feel inferior because of your chosen hobby. Whether we're talking about video games or, like I said, tabletop games, comic books, your hobby is your chosen hobby. I could spend my money and spend my time on video gaming, or I could spend a lot of money and a lot of time buying guns and ammo and sitting out in the woods and waiting on a deer to walk by that I can shoot, right? So it's just a matter of what you're into. But anybody that tries to delegitimize your chosen hobby, you shrug that off. You don't listen to them. Video gaming especially is something that is moving it more and more into different artistic endeavors. So even if you don't know how to program, you might write a song for a game. You might draw characters for a game. You might write a story for a game. And you get back into writing stories, and some of the stories, different types of literature you see. John might want to say a little bit more about the comic book side of that. And just how mature some of the stories are, and the same thing can happen. You can have a parent like, oh, it's a comic book, it's fine for my little 7-year-old. It may not be, right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of what I was talking about before was the direction that some of these things go, and we talk about how deep they are. But just to add legitimacy, I think, I kind of pulled up a list, and you guys can find it too. And I hate using. I'm an English teacher, and I hate using Wikipedia as a resource. They're a good starting point, but sometimes they have enough information to kind of get you started. In 1922, they initiated the Pulitzer Prize for editorial cartooning. That's kind of where things started. They all started in the newspaper, and then in 1946, there's the Reuben Award. There's the National Cartoonist Society Awards, Comics Buyer's Guide. Some of you guys may be aware of what that is. It actually quit in 2008 because of the Comics Buyer's Guide, because the internet killed those things. Will Eisner Awards, Harvey Awards, Kirby Awards. There's so many lists of awards here that kind of go into that add legitimacy to this medium. And I remember growing up reading these stories about these characters, and I remember in the 90s, and some of you guys might remember it too, there was the old Captain America movie. I always look at that, and I remember sitting in class, and somebody asked the teacher, or they asked the class in general, and it was while the teacher was in there, it's kind of at a down moment, and they asked, has anybody seen that Captain America movie? And it was at that point in time that those things were not popular. Comic book characters were not popular. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to say I've already seen this movie 3 times. I'm not going to say it out loud because, one, the movie was pretty terrible. But at the same time, though, that's something that at that point in time was not very socially acceptable. And now it's far more so. You say, if somebody says, have you seen the Captain America movie? Yeah, I've seen all of them several times. As a matter of fact, next weekend is the Infinity War. And it's probably, if it's not already sold out, it will be by the time it's shown. And it's...
Everybody in here is like, yep, I know what's coming.
Yeah, everybody knows. And we'll probably see you there. We'll actually have we're doing a podcast with...
Cutting Class Podcast.
Cutting Class Podcast, yeah, I couldn't pull it. We'll be doing kind of a combination with them discussing it. So it'll be a lot of fun. But we're very excited. Isn't it for us a great time to be alive where we can see all of these things? And these things that we grew up with that were not mainstream, that are now mainstream. It's amazing to me to see that kind of turnaround on them.
Here's my thing, and one of the things that's going to keep gaming moving towards the mainstream, and comics pretty much already there, especially comic book movies. These movies are causing people to go and purchase comics that have never even given it a thought before. And now people are interested in those characters and those storylines. Some of them may be surprised when they find something like Age of Ultron on the page, and you're like, wait a minute, this is nothing like the movie. So, and a lot of them are that way. But the thing that's going to help us to make people understand, and some of the things we wanted to do today is trying to let you have some information that you can at least come back to them and say, look, what about this? And some of the things that I found and I wanted to bring up is that music has a parental advisory system, right? There's a label. Anything that's not suitable for kids, it's clearly labeled. And people know, no, son, you can't have that CD, right? Or you can't listen to that. And movies the same way. You got everything from G movies, and then it runs the gamut. G movies is for everybody. And then PG is, you might want to think about what they're watching. PG-13 about it a little harder, right? And then obviously you got R and then NC-17, which is not for kids at all, right? And so everybody accepts that, like, okay, 9-year-olds don't need to be going into an R-rated movie. But for some reason, they don't view video games as the same way. Even though gaming has the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, and it has very clear ratings along the same lines. There's E for everyone, there's everyone 10 and up, there's teenagers, mature games, adults only games, and then even if the game doesn't have a rating yet, they'll have a rating pending, right? So every video game in this country especially is clearly marked and is right there for parents to be able to look and see what they want their kids to be able to play. The problem is that most parents don't even think about it like that. I remember when we used to work at GameStop, we had, I guess he was like 8 or 9 years old, and he came in, at the time it was Grand Theft Auto 3. He came in looking for Grand Theft Auto 3, plopped it up on the counter, and we were like, sorry kid, we can't sell you that. So he turned away and went out, got his mom, brought her back in there, and then I tried to explain to her, like, this is why I can't sell this to your son. It has violence, it has sexual themes, it has language, it has all these different things that are not suitable for kids. It's a mature rated game. He's 8 years old. I can't legally sell it to him. So what does she do? It'd be nice if she said, oh, well, I didn't know he was looking for a game like that. We need to pick something else. That's not how she responded. She just said, okay, I'll buy it. Like she didn't even hear what I was saying. And then I guarantee you that same mother will be the one to complain about what her kid is playing and what video games are making her child do, right? Well, if she had done just a little bit of parenting, it might have helped. But that's one of the things that is going to get better when more and more people begin to view gaming for what it is. And to realize that gaming, just like movies, there's kids games, there's more grown-up games, there's action games and dramatic games and scary games and then sports games, and there are some games that are geared towards kids. Maybe that's what your kids ought to be playing. I mean, be involved in their lives. But as long as you view it as a kid's toy across the board, then you have problems come up because you have kids playing games that don't need to be played. Now this year, I guess starting last year, we've come up on a whole new problem, which is the loot boxes and the gambling element in some games. And there are literally digital slot machines in some games that any kid with access to the credit card number can run up a little bill, right? And now we have people involved. We have politicians and other different lawmakers and different boards involved saying that we need to keep an eye on this. We need to make sure that children aren't gambling, right? Because you're spending real world money and in some cases getting a product that even though it's digital, it can be sold on certain markets. I don't know if any of you are familiar with like Counter-Strike and some of the other online games. You can sell some of that DLC online. And so it's just like you had actual merchandise you were holding in your hands. So the problem is now that people are gambling for some of this stuff and then turn around and selling it. And so now we're getting into actual gambling laws, and a lot of countries are starting to take a little closer look at that and say maybe preteens and even young teens, maybe you don't need to be gambling, right? And so that's brought up a whole other issue. And it's just one more thing that we have to be paying attention to. And to say, okay, video games are legitimate entertainment for grown people. You cannot just assume every game is for kids, because that's where you begin to get into trouble. And that's why I say we have a little bit of a problem. And I don't know how many of you have ever experienced that at all? Like someone in your life has, for whatever your hobby is, they're like, you know, you need to give that up, or you should have grown out of that by now. Anybody ever experienced that? And so you know what that's like, and then especially when you get to be our age, a little older, and most of your peers, sometimes it's your parents, but usually it's either people you work with or even some friends who basically have the attitude, I can't believe you still do that. right? I grew out of that years ago. Well, that's fine for you, but it doesn't delegitimize my choices, right? And I feel like if we can get people to see how ironic it is, like I guarantee you that if you have somebody in your life that is trying to make you feel childish for your particular hobby, there's no doubt they have a hobby that is just as childish in some circles, right? They're the ones that sit in front of a TV for 5 hours a night. And
Chris
somehow,
listens to Taylor Swift.
I did not know that. Yeah, maybe Taylor Swift's your thing, I don't know. But and if it is, more power to you. But like I said, somehow, now that everybody has a cell phone, if you're playing Candy Crush or what was it, for years it was like Farmville and things like that. You can play all of those Facebook games or mobile games, that's perfectly fine. Somehow that doesn't count as video gaming, right? But you put a controller in your hand and it's a whole new ball game now. But that's one of the things that it has to happen for us to grow past. And think about it this way. Movies and music both went through this type of growth. It's just that they've been around that much longer. We're still fairly young in the grand scheme of things when it comes to all different types of entertainment. Video gaming is still fairly young. Comic books, a little older, but still, comic books went through their period where that was just a childish thing. You know, rock and roll went through the period of every parent in the nation was against that because my son or daughter is going to wind up doing something that's either sinful or illegal, right? And that rock and roll is going to make them do it, right? And sadly, a lot of people view gaming that way now. Every time dip off into something a little more serious, I guess. Every time there's a school shooting, something like that, everybody runs straight to, well, did they play video games? It's not a really good barometer to see what might have caused the shooting because most teenagers play video games. So that's like saying, well, they brushed their teeth. They went and shut up a school, they brushed their teeth. We need to do something about all this toothbrushing, right? Nobody says that. They go straight for the games. When there's other things at play, there's maybe some mental health issues, some bullying might be going on. There's all different kinds of things that can contribute to something like that. But most of your politicians and parents will go straight to, oh yeah, it's that Call of Duty, that made him go shoot up the school. I don't know if we could say that. Most of the genuine studies out there prove completely different. Video games are not going to make you violent unless there's something else going on in your life that made you violent. And what'd you say?
The video games are the scapegoat.
Yeah, they're the scapegoat.
It's the easy answer that they can turn to.
Yeah, that's the one. It's so easy to just say, oh yeah, it's that game. We've got to do something about that, right? And the thing is that when you begin to look into what playing a game does to a child especially, what's actually going on is they're improving their problem-solving skills, they're practicing or exercising their hand-eye coordination. Those are the types of things that a child is gaining from playing games. And it's not that the game is causing them to be an axe murderer, you know, against their will. That's not going on at all. And the studies show that. And there's a good book. I can't remember the names of the authors, but you could probably find it fairly easily. But the name of the book is called Grand Theft Childhood, and it's actually two psychiatrists that wrote the book. And their studies show what we just talked about: hand-eye coordination, problem-solving skills. Nothing in their studies show that playing a game where you shoot a gun will allow you to know how to go and shoot somebody, right? That connect is not there. People are trying to make it every day, but that connection is not there when you look at the actual studies. And these two psychiatrists know way more about psychiatry than I do, and they're the ones that said, look, there are only benefits to the normal, well-adjusted child playing video games. Now, you're going to have sometimes kids, teenagers, even adults that see something on the movie screen or play something on a game or hear something in a song that flips their switch because something was already going on with them. It'll flip their switch and cause horrible things to happen. Eminem has a lyric in one of his songs that he says, "If music can alter moods and talk to you, then tell the judge it was my fault and I'll get sued." And that makes so much sense when you just push everything out of the way and just look at the facts. Honestly, listening to a rap song is not going to force you to do anything that you weren't maybe already thinking about or weren't predisposed to. It's not going to force you to do something against your will. It's not going to, it may cause you to have different interests or change your personality a little bit if you get into that certain types of music, but it's not going to cause you to do violent and illegal things, especially mass murdering people. Something else has to be going on there. So all this goes back to viewing things in the proper perspective. As long as we look at Call of Duty as just another kid's toy, and you're letting your 7-year-old shoot up everybody every night, that may over time do something to them. I don't know the psychology there, but don't let your kids play games that are not for kids. That's what I'm saying.
That's why the ratings are in place.
That's why the ratings are there. And that is to help parents parent, basically. To help you be a parent, to be involved in what your kids are doing. You know, and it's anything. If they're watching things on YouTube, pay attention to what they're watching. Don't just let them watch anything. And if they're playing games, pay attention to what they're playing. Don't use it as a babysitter, right? You got to be involved in what they're doing. But that all starts with the parents, especially viewing it in the proper context. Do any of you have any questions about gaming, or like I said, John's the comics guru, or really any one of our fandoms? Question about any of those, or maybe a comment about something somebody might have said to you, or a question about anything we've talked about?
Do you think video games not causing violence among kids? Do you think that changes when you move to something like VR, when it's more realistic? I know we haven't got there yet, but as it gets more realistic and you're in VR and you're actually standing up doing the act rather than on the controller, do you think it starts to change a little bit?
Now here's the deal with VR. The argument has been made for years that, like, you can't tell me this kid holding a controller and, you know, moving the thumbsticks can take that and go shoot a gun. Moving into VR, I don't know if any of you played Farpoint on the PSVR with that aim controller that is a rifle basically. And when you're in the headset, what you see is a gun that you're holding in your hands. Now, if somebody's watching you play it, it just looks silly. You're just holding a plastic controller. But in the game, you're holding the weapon. You're aiming down the sights. Okay, you have to actually aim down the sight. Now, that doesn't translate into being able to operate an actual rifle, but it's closer. It's moving in that direction, where now you can't say, oh, you're just moving thumbsticks on a controller. That doesn't help you shoot. If you're aiming down the sights in a VR game, that's moving even closer to actually shooting. I love virtual reality, and I've done a lot of VR reviews, but Farpoint was one of the games that I've played, and that kind of sticks out as any of those games that are able to be almost room scale, and you can do the same action with your physical body that you're seeing in the headset, then that just takes everything one step closer. And shooting a weapon, like that's part of it. Even if you can't maybe work all the particular parts on the weapon, you don't know how the safety works, or you may not know how to load the clip and all that for a specific weapon, but you got part of it already practiced. You've been aiming down the sight. So it may get to the point where you're doing everything that you have to do in real life, and loading the clip and cocking it and putting it, and the more realistic that gets, well, the closer it gets to actual training. So there is a danger for that there. And it still goes back to even people that shoot real guns. Okay, I know that I can shoot a deer or a squirrel, stray cat. No, I'm just kidding. But we know what we can shoot and what we can't shoot, right? Everybody knows you don't shoot people. You don't shoot up a bunch of people. People know that are well-adjusted and normal, right? So for you to reach the point where you're walking through a mall mowing people down, or a theater or a school, something else is going on beyond just playing games. There's other things that maybe could have been noticed before. Like, that's a whole other field when we get to talking about psychology and the different types of doctors that could have helped in those situations. But I feel like you said, it's the first scapegoat everybody goes to. Oh, it must be the games they play. That's an easy out. That's just a quick fix. And if you decide to put in a bunch of laws when it comes to certain kids playing certain games, and you start just putting laws on the books to deal with that without dealing with the root of the problem, well, then you're not really solving much. Do you have anything to add or say about what we've been talking about?
I think you nailed it.
Well, like I said, you can find YouTube videos and articles and other things that people have been making that say just what we've been saying. They say, look, all of my friends think I'm childish, right? And I read an article the other day that was by a guy, Ryan Winslet, and this article's 3 years old now, it's in 2015. But his article was basically saying, maybe it's time for me to give up gaming. The article says, I love playing games. I love collecting games. But because of the way people view it, maybe it's time for me to give it up. I would say to anybody in this whole convention hall, I would want them to hear, don't give up what you love because of what people say or the way people might think about you. Because they just don't understand it or don't get it, right? So it's not something that you should be swayed just by your group of friends' opinion. So we kind of said that, but I mentioned the mother that came and purchased Grand Theft Auto for her son. Now, she never came back complaining about it, but that's exactly the type of parent that would complain about the game when they bought it without even thinking about what it was.
Well, these parents are using them as babysitters. They're
Well,
it's pacification of the child.
Right.
And they don't care what's on it as long as the kid leaves them alone.
That's it. And if you didn't hear that, he said, look, they're using it as babysitters. It's a pacifier, right? And whether you're talking about TV or YouTube or games or whatever, nothing should be used in that way. Just to say, well, I can put him on the iPad and leave him alone for 5 hours and I can do what I want to do. Yeah, that may be true, but what is that doing to your kid, right? Now, I realize we're in a whole different area nowadays where the technology is such that it's so far. I can't imagine if when we were younger, I can't imagine us being in high school and having Facebook. It would have been a completely different experience. But everything from your relationships with people to being bullied, all of those things are completely different. Peer pressure today is 24/7. It's nonstop. Back in the day, you might be in a group, you might be in a situation where they're about to do something stupid and everybody's saying, come on, let's do it. And you can just say, no, not for me, and walk away. But today, it is non-stop. It's 24/7, a barrage of peer pressure in various social media platforms and other avenues. So it's a completely different game nowadays. Is there any other? Now I know that, like John mentioned when we started, some of you came in here because the schedule said podcasting. So we have probably 5 or 6 minutes left, but based on the time he showed me a while ago, if there's any podcasting questions that you had. And honestly, the guys in the back row may be able to answer them as well as we do. They've been doing this longer than we have.
I did ask you about a comic question.
Right.
With the evolution of comics, the way they followed the age bracket of people, like when we got into it when we were younger, and they're maturing along with their fan base. Do you think that the comic industry is going to start using the parental codes? Because you have some that are, definitely for the younger generation, and then you have more of the graphic novel, like the Killing Joke, that might imply a rape scenario or something in that book that maybe anybody can buy that. Do you think that they need to start doing a parental control over that?
I don't think it's a bad idea. I think for a while that they actually did that, and probably mid to late 90s they got away from it. I think it was Marvel that first left.
Yeah, I think so.
And
well, now I'm taking the manga and the graphic novels out of the equation.
Right.
Those normally it's kind of standard to be more adult.
More mature,
Yeah.
right.
You know what you're getting there.
Right, you know what you're getting in those, but now you have the drugstore comics nowadays that are actually more adult-oriented as well.
Right.
More adult relationships. They're getting into adult matters, and some like sexual content.
Yeah.
And anybody can walk into a drugstore and pick those up. Do you think they should get back to the parental code and maybe put them behind a counter?
I think it's, again, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think the problem that you're going to run into, well, maybe
Censorship is getting a very touchy subject there.
it really is, and it really depends on how many of the companies buy into it, I guess. If it becomes if it's a government mandated thing, then where everybody has to do it,
Right.
then I think at that point they'll actually do it. But the reason that Marvel quit doing it, and I think subsequently DC kind of started doing their own thing, they started rating their own comics, and if you go look at it, it'll say like 13 plus or something. And I think it was it was the ESRB, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
That was the games, yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was, but yeah. So I know DC does their own thing, but I don't think it's a bad idea, especially if you're considering the maturity level and how these things do continue to grow.
Well, they get their fingers out everywhere. They're trying to appeal to the younger generation, and you see kids out here today walking around dressed as Rocket Raccoon, and,
Right.
and so they're very young, and by the time they get 9 or 10 or 11 and get a little allowance money, they can walk into any drugstore and pick up a book.
Yeah, that's true, but at the same time, I think that a lot of it goes back to parents being involved.
Right.
The thing that I have, my daughter's 7, and I'm very conscious of the things that she brings home. I'm not always able to censor the things that she sees and hears at school, and sometimes it's a little surprising. But at that point, as far as the video games go, it's very light. I make sure that and I encourage her to read, because, and especially anything that she might deem of interest. She's like her dad, poor thing. She likes comics, so I have to make sure that the things that she reads are acceptable. Is it government responsibility? It shouldn't be. It should be household responsibility. It should be the job of the parents, but at the same time, it goes back to what you said a moment ago. Pacification. These things are a means to pacify children so mom and dad could go do their own thing, which in and of itself is terrible, especially when you think that, what is it that kids want? They want mom and dad's attention.
Right.
So should it happen? It shouldn't have to happen.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have to happen.
Shouldn't have
Be
to.
better parents, right?
And not you, but...
Not you.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not.
I could ask you who Superman or Goku, but we'd be here forever.
Oh, man.
Superman. What are you talking about?
I want to say it was Screw Attack actually did a video based on that, and it was actually really good and in-depth. And I would probably agree with the outcome.
Well, he gave us the wrap up, so let's
Okay.
thank everybody.
Well, thank you guys for coming out. Make sure that you stop by the table. If you have not entered yet into the contest, we're trying to give away a Nintendo Switch, so come see us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.